Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session. Our first agenda item of the night is Colorado Mounted Ranger Program discussion. Commander Sam Watson, Assistant Manager Murphy Robinson, and a representative from the Colorado Mounted Rangers was present to discuss a partnership with the City of Inglewood Police Department. Good evening and welcome. I'd like to do some introductions. We can return the favor.
Yes, sir. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. I guess first we'll introduce Lieutenant Colonel Tolbert with the Colorado Rangers. I don't know if you guys want to go around.
Pleasure to meet you all. Thank you for the invite.
Good evening. Welcome. Councilmember Barentine, would you mind kicking us off with some introductions?
Barentine, District 3.
Rita Russell at large.
Rick Gillett, District 4, Mayor Pro Tem.
Joe Jefferson, Mayor and District 1.
Allison McKinney Brown, City Attorney.
Eric Keck, City Manager.
Linda Olson, District 2.
Amy Martinez, at large.
Steve Yates at large.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, again for allowing us to be here before you this evening. Wanted to bring you this program that we like to start with the Colorado Rangers, in that the Colorado Rangers is a law enforcement auxiliary that provides service to municipalities and sheriff's departments throughout the state of Colorado. I'll let Lieutenant Tolbert, I demoted you quite a bit there. Lieutenant Colonel Tolbert explain to you all the history and everything from there. But I personally have been involved with the Rangers, have gotten involved with the Rangers once I learned about it starting last year in December. And after learning about it, I literally said, where have you guys been? Because I know that from the services that they provide and the fact that they're free services, a lot of municipalities can benefit from what they do. And so with that said, I will have Lieutenant Colonel Tolbert take over the presentation, and then our police deputy chief is here for questions as well.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here and have an opportunity to share the Rangers story with you. I'm the second in command in Colorado for the Colorado Ranger Auxiliary, to give you a sense of where I fit in. The Colorado Rangers were formed in 1861 when Colorado Territory was established, the same time frame that the Texas Rangers, more notable organization, Arizona Rangers, and others were formed in the territories. We were the only law enforcement organization in Colorado until the early 1900s, when the Colorado State Courtesy Patrol was formed, an unarmed courtesy patrol, the forebearer of the Colorado State Patrol. In 1945, we became an all-volunteer law enforcement organization that was in and out of the statutes over time. And we were put back in the statutes in 2012 as the law enforcement auxiliary for the state of Colorado. And the bill provided the mechanisms whereby we can form relationships with both urban and rural law enforcement entities. You mentioned municipalities. There's a couple where we have MOUs with cities, but most of them are with sheriff departments or police departments, including Auraria Campus and Aurora Community College, those kinds of entities. We have about 55 MOUs in place. Everything we do is laid out in the MOU in advance. The way the statute is written, we are just like a member of the local law enforcement group that we have the MOU with whatever authorities and duties they delegate to us when they call us up to assist. We're covered under the same state indemnification and workers' comp kinds of coverages that your regular law enforcement groups are covered under. So we serve at the pleasure of the chief or the sheriff, and they delegate various levels of authority to us in our work. So what do? We do regular law enforcement. Many times what our goal is is to provide an all-volunteer, rate-free way to augment law enforcement groups that can't afford to maintain high numbers of staff full-time to cover the peaks that they might have based on events or floods or wildfires or other things. We normally come in and relieve the local officers so they can move to the front lines and deal with the communities that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. We have been asked to do everything from VIP security for congressional delegations that have come to different communities in Colorado, to traffic control for major events. We support Dillon Police Chief for the big events that they have in the Dillon area where they've got to get 15,000 people in and out in a hurry, and their 3 or 4 officers can't handle that. We also do emergency response and recovery during the millennial floods that we had in 2013. Take, for example, the town of Milliken, about 3,000 residents, 2 bridges, both of which went down, power went out, water got shut off. You had a police chief and 1 deputy, and they were essentially toast after day 2 because they had to cover all the public safety aspects plus traditional law enforcement. They called the 2 counties that they are close to, Weld and Larimer, and the sheriff there said, sorry, we love you, but we don't have anybody because we're up to our nose in water on our own right now. So they reached out to us. We brought in a cadre of rangers who provided everything from incident command under the ICS system to bridge closure protection, dispatch calls in town, emergency calls, and we ended up in a 2-week period providing over 1,800 hours of free law enforcement support to the chief there. So needless to say, we're one of his favorite groups in the state.
Sure.
We do 40 to 50,000 hours of volunteer police service every year, and you can multiply that times whatever your hourly rate is and see what a savings that is to the communities we support. Where our sweet spot is rural communities where they have the 1 chief and 1 deputy and bad things happen. But we also have MOUs in place with Douglas County, Eagle County for the Olympic events that were held here, Fort Lupton, Adams County, and just communities up and down the Front Range and across the state and other parts of the state. So our value proposition is that we are trained to post standard police officer standards, that we self-organize and provide all of our own transportation, all of our own equipment and support, radio, gear, duty belts, body armor, the whole ball of wax. We provide on our own. We pay for our own training in the past, which has been an expensive proposition. I spent 2 years in Colorado as the head of the Colorado Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, which is all the faith-based groups, Salvation Army, Red Cross, and everybody else who responded to tornadoes and wildfires and floods. And as I watched the Rangers, I was extraordinarily impressed with the quality of people and the level of dedication, because it's not, I'm a Red Cross volunteer among other things and volunteer with Volunteers of America, but there's a difference between that and putting out thousands of dollars to provide my own uniforms, my own duty belts, my own weapons, my own training costs, which are expensive. That's why I joined the Rangers myself, as I saw what an extraordinary, well-trained, dedicated group they were, and they're the unique bridge between law enforcement and communities that no other volunteer organization in Colorado can do. If I can touch on the legislation, we had various bipartisan individuals come up and sponsor legislation at the beginning of this year to move us into a little different category, because right now we're a 501c3 state auxiliary in the statutes. And in order to get CIRSA insurance, and a variety of other kinds of things, we need to become a governmental organization. So the legislation creates an intergovernmental agency out of the partners that we have, the 55 MOUs, and that becomes a government entity which is led by and managed by law enforcement professional organizations, and then we'll be trained to official post standards, and will become the shared reserve statewide. So if Department of Homeland Security has a major issue north of Grand Junction, they can call us in to augment law enforcement in those areas. So we're into the next level of the evolution of the Rangers since 1861. That, I think, covers most of it. Any questions, I'd be glad to
Thank
answer.
you. Commander Watson, you got something you'd like to add at all?
Thanks. We had a meeting a few weeks ago with Chief Collins and other members of the organization. Murphy and the city manager were there, and the value that it could bring to our organization is great. Obviously, we're not giving up any operational authority from the police department. They would be there to supplement us. We talked about 3 likely types of events where we could use them. One would be pre-planned events, parades. 4th of July is probably the one of the best examples where they could come in and help us with crowd control, traffic control. The way the mounted rangers operate is they're under our direct control. So there'd be a incident commander, if you will, from Inglewood Police, and then they would report directly to the incident commander as far as direction and types of activities. So pre-planned events, 4th of July parades, maybe large funeral processions, things that would tax our resources, that we would have to use so many of our officers on the street working that event that we'd have a difficult time providing other services to our community. So that's one scenario. Another one would be a reactionary or emergency event that would go beyond a normal operational period, normally more than 12 hours. Hazardous materials situation where we'd have to shut down traffic over a large area for a large amount of time. An event, a lost child. Maybe we're doing large canvases, large area searches. They're actually quite good at those, from the way I understand it. And a third one might be, and we're just exploring the idea of long-term prisoner security. Occasionally, not very often, we get prisoners that need to be guarded up at the hospital before they can be transferred to the jail. Sometimes that takes days or even weeks that we have to guard a prisoner, and again, that's taxing to our resources. So again, the entire time they'd be under our supervision, and we'd be working with them the entire time. So,
can I add one thing?
Yes, sir.
We do have we're called the Colorado Mounted Rangers, and so every time we meet a kid, he says, "Where's your horse?" We do have a mounted unit, has I think 11 mounted officers right now. Many of them are Denver County deputies. When Denver did away with its mounted unit and Weld County did away with those, we picked those up. So we do a lot of wide area search and rescue and tough country coverage with our mounted units. So that is a unique resource we have.
So many of you are, I know, thinking, so how many of these Rangers are across the state? So I'll preemptively answer that question. There's around 250, I believe, Rangers across the state. In meeting some of these Rangers, I've been impressed. They range from everything from former federal judges to lawyers to doctors to artists to former law enforcement, former federal law enforcement, former local law enforcement. We have a mayor. It's impressive the amount of talent that's brought from this organization. The former Speaker of the House of Colorado is also a Mounted Ranger. And so the training, but also the expertise that this organization has impressed me. And that's why they're in front of you today, because I think it's definitely an asset that we can utilize. So we'll entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and I'm excited to have this part of our city. I did have a couple of questions, and you had mentioned, are you actually post-certified, or did you say you follow post standards?
Yeah, this transition we're going through is to get post-certified. What we use is post-certified instructors to teach the post-approved law enforcement venue, about 200 hours of training on all the normal use of force, community policing, handguns, OC, taser, all of those kinds of things. So it's post-instructors following the post-course, but because we're 501c3, we're not in the post-certified database.
Okay.
And the move to an IGA changes our status, which then allows us to maintain those records.
I will offer one more thing too, in that we just recently, and I say we because I was part of the consortium that went to the House of Representatives for this, but the House of Representatives just passed unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee to move forward to a final vote to bring the Rangers to post standard. Up until this point, and this was hard for me to understand at first as well, but up until this point, the Colorado Rangers, because they were the first law enforcement agency, were the only law enforcement agency in the state of Colorado that had its own statute that said, within this statute, that's where your powers lie. The rest were under peace officer standards and training. Well, through all of this transition, the Rangers were using post standards and training to post standards, but never had to really abide by post standards because they had their own statute. The new colonel, Colonel Abramson, is of the ideas that even though they are regulated by a different statute, they should be regulated by the same statutes that every other peace officer is regulated by. So that's why they had to go to the legislature to say, hey, can you allow us to be just like every other cop in the state and allow us to be post-certified peace officers in the post portal, as well as being governed by the same statutes instead of having our own. And so far, so good. It passed unanimously out of the Senate. It passed 35-0. And also it's passed unanimously out of the House Judiciary Committee. It is now going to the House for their final vote. And so they will be post-certified here coming up soon. But they've always trained to post standards.
But they have to take a test to be certified
Yes.
individually. And a follow-up question to that is, if they're not post-certified, are they sworn peace officers where they can make arrests, or are they more police monitors?
Well, yeah, you've been watching the television. Yeah, exactly.
Use the mic.
Yeah, sorry. We have the peace officer authority given to us by the host when we serve under the host. In some jurisdictions, it's full arrest authority. They give us the keys to the cruisers, and we respond to dispatch, and we can detain and arrest. In other jurisdictions, it's short of that, and we can't institute an arrest unless one of the full-time local peace officers is there. And what we do is we detain and they arrest. So, and we use the same standards of property, chain of custody, and all those kinds of things, transport and other kinds of aspects of it. But it really is based on who we're serving and what level of responsibility they're willing to vest on us. You mentioned a minute ago that we work under the direct hand and supervision in close proximity to the host, and they direct us. And so it's I, sir, at that point.
And just for Murphy or Deputy Chief, will they have that authority with Inglewood? How will they operate with Inglewood? What authority will we be giving them to move forward on this? And that's my last question.
The way it's being drafted now, to my understanding, is that they'll work either in close proximity, like was mentioned, or under the direct control of either an officer, a detective, or another officer. I mean, use the 4th of July as an example. They may be directing traffic at an intersection, and 2 blocks or a block away there's a regular Inglewood police officer directing traffic. Well, they're working as the same team. So there may be a division of, a block or two blocks, but they're their control is from our command post or from our supervisors, if you will. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a commander or deputy chief. It could be an officer that directly controls and supervises them as well. So, yes, sir.
The pattern when we sign an MOU has been they take us out on a test flight. We come, we support an event, we do simple traffic control and other simple duties. They size us up, determine what our competence, capability, common sense is, and the trust level builds until we get to the level, as I mentioned, where sometimes we show up in some jurisdictions. They say, here's the key to the cruiser. You guys have the duty for the next 8 hours. So it is gradual, built up based on trust and observation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
To my knowledge, we're not planning on taking it to that level. That we would stop more at the special event or the event that takes us beyond multiple operational periods, longer than 12 hours or 24 hours, where we need help with traffic control or crowd control or area search.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
But it's not out of the scope that it could happen, like what he said, depending on the situation. You guys would make that decision. We would trust you to make that decision, and whether they had that authority or not. This would give them the MOU that we would be doing would give you that opportunity to make that decision given the circumstance. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I haven't seen the MOU, and I think that would have to be specifically drafted in the MOU for that type of authority.
And then you have a volunteer organization, and you are going to the legislature apparently to kind of make sure that you have some additional authorities to be able to expand what you're doing. And how many MOUs how many municipalities are you doing this process with?
55 currently. And what we're doing is we're trying to transition from 501c3
Right.
to quasi-governmental with a structure.
Kind of similar
an
to the
IGA.
Civil Air Patrol in a kind of a way.
Civil Air Patrol is
Except
one of
for
the models.
you have all the authority to do within that scope, except get paid. And so if you're all of a sudden, yeah, I know, you missed a vital part there. So if you have all of these municipalities now signing up, are you expecting your volunteer base to expand, or did you feel you were underutilizing your organization previously, or because it seems like you would be taking on a lot more?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We were one of the best kept secrets in Colorado up until a few years ago, because nobody knew what the Colorado Rangers were, what their history was. We went from about 20 MOUs to 55 in the last 2 years. That means demand has gone up, and we had a level of a little over 100 Rangers a couple of years ago. So we found ourselves stressed to be able to meet the demand. So we started a concentrated recruiting program, and we brought on 43 Rangers. I think last year we have 45 in the current academy class that's going through right now. So we're in the process of building to keep up with the demand that we have. One other thing is, going back to the previous question, we don't take cowboys. No offense to any cowboys in the room. We're looking
Or cowgirls.
Yeah, or cowboys. Yes, ma'am, precisely. We're looking for professionals. We put them through the same filters that a normal police department would put them through. They have to go through CBI check, FBI fingerprint, national check, and they get psych evaluation to make sure that their makeup is stable and what it normally takes to be a good community policing police officer. So we don't just take anybody that raises their hand, and if we found anybody that hasn't functioned the way we expected, we've had a couple returned military vets that were in security police services, but they came back with PTSD, and as we watched them and trained them, we realized that there was a little
Not a good fit.
Yeah, too much PTSD involved, and so we've removed them from the program. So our quality control is a big issue to us.
Okay. And was there, I mean, aside from that, obviously you think your organization does an awesome job and provides a good service. Was there some other reason why there was such a push to go ahead and expand the services that you guys are providing? Aside, why move to the quasi-governmental thing and just expand it, or do you just think you can provide the better service? Or
A little bit of it has been in jurisdictions where we've gone and served under an MOU with a police chief. It's not unusual to have the county, for example, Vail Police Chief brought us in for the Alpine Games. The sheriff in Eagle County saw how we were equipped, how we conducted ourselves, and said, "You guys come in, I need to talk to you because I need your services." And so it propagates, the circle propagates out, and that's what's been happening.
Thank you.
And we enjoy serving, and I can tell you that I'm retired military, and as I told somebody today, that's how I earn my retired paycheck, is by putting it back into serving my community and other communities as a ranger. So.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you for your service, and thank you for coming down today and telling us the story of the Mounted Rangers and providing, I think, what could be that bridge, like you said, between our uniformed personnel and police and our community. It sounds like a great partnership. I can think of several great uses. I do feel comfortable granting general authority to the chief to decide, how best to use this resource. I assume, without any major objection, this will come forward when, Mr. Keck? Do you have any idea?
At the most applicable time when we actually have the MOU prepared and been reviewed by our attorney.
Okay. So at best at the end of May, probably, maybe in June.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from Council? Councilmember Barrington?
actually, for the city manager, certainly if we intend to use them for an event, then to include, similar to the Malley Center, that the volunteer hours are included in the cost and part of that benefit that we're getting from that.
Yes, ma'am. We can track
Thanks.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, seeing 4th of July is one of the major, I think, contributions we can make early on. Let's make sure that timeline works out as far as getting them approved to get them on the ground for the 4th.
If I can add, FEMA loves us, and the state Homeland Security loves us because our hours are the color of volunteer hours. They get reimbursed by the federal government, and they're used as Colorado's contribution to recovery grants. So that math is important.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate you coming down again. We'll move on to our second agenda item. This is Broadway Improvements Plan Finalization. Community Development Director Brad Power and Public Works Director, Dave Henderson, are present to discuss the finalization of the South Broadway Improvement Plan. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. I brought the whole Public Works gang so we could answer any questions you have tonight. Brad won't be able to be with us tonight, but anyway, I was real pleased to hear that the Inglewood Urban Renewal Authority gave us the $133,000 to close that funding gap we talked about on the 27th. And so now we have $533,000 for the electrical, for the pedestrian lights, for the new street lights by Excel, and potentially some public art, wayfinding, and painting of furniture. So this morning, we met with the Broadway merchants, and there were really very few comments about the items I just discussed. We showed them some potential banners that are up on the wall here. By the way, we're not really asking for a decision on what we want tonight. We're just showing you some of the things we're working on. That'll come down the line. But we also painted one of the trash can lids, a color that was talked about here a few weeks ago. That's a bronze color. You might remember I don't do colors, but that's what we got there. The Excel poles have to be replaced in the 3400 block. They're all rusted, and Excel won't allow us to put the banners up there until we do that. We already ordered those, though. And those are full-size 2 foot by 4 foot is what they'll be. Let's see, we've also issued an RFP for electrical design, and I'm not sure when that comes back. Paul, do you remember? Oh, this week already, okay. So we'll have the design engineer help us select the pedestrian light standards we want to use. They got the catalogs and the prices, and they're the experts in that. We'll let them propose some things to us to bring to you later. So I'd like to kind of open up to questions about those items before we get into the mid-block, because really that meeting this morning was dominated by discussions about the mid-block crossing.
Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Barentine, did you have something? I did want to, I guess, just make a couple of comments regarding your guys' efforts. Thank you for having the meeting today. I'm sort of looking forward, I guess, to a future presentation where we can see sort of the design elements come together with some sort of recommendation. I'm glad to hear the Excel lighting will be replaced. A lot of the Excel lights in the 3400 block are still not just working. They're just not providing any light. Have we worked with Excel on trying to get those fixed? I know we had that problem when we started construction over there on the Acoma property, but more recently I'm also noticing there's several lights out on that block.
Well, we'll inventory that. I thought they were working, quite honestly. I know after our request they did repair them.
Awesome. Maybe this is just a council request to maybe look at a couple of those lights again.
Okay.
That's in the 3400 block?
Yes, sir. And, taking a look at the electrical, I think part of the intent, I think, is to support some accessory lighting functions like lighting over Broadway or lighting over the Paseo or lighting on a tree or uplighting on the trees. Have we thought about those sort of elements, and will this electrical build-out be able to support those sort of accessory lights?
We did make part of the RFP. We made the engineers aware that we were looking at something like that. We'll obviously have new electrical circuits at each of the trees that will be upgraded, but there may be some other areas that we incorporated. I don't have exactly where or what yet, but it'll be part of the design.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson, and I'll come back to Valentine.
Thank you, and you did a great job this morning. I wanted to ask about what you did find out this morning on these. Did you get anything after the meeting was over in terms of looking at some of this and giving you any input?
The only comment I had about the banners was somebody said, can we incorporate some green into them? And I asked them to, think about it, and through Paul out there at the Bob to communicate with us. Send us an email if you have any comments. That's the only comment I had. And I don't believe anybody talked about the pedestrian lights or the electrical.
So what I'm concerned with is that they were so hot to talk about the other topic that they probably aren't really looking at this. And is there a way for us to get some of them involved as maybe a couple of representatives that when we start to go to work on these that we really have had some people give some input? Because I just don't think it was like that's nothing compared to the parking issue that they were concerned about.
I agree. And yes, I think that's a great idea. I think as the electrical engineers on board, we'll,
Great. I think that'll help. Thanks.
Them. Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine?
The XL lighting that doesn't work on there, there's a couple of them that haven't, but I'm only aware of one for sure that's still out, and that's right in front of the Inglewood Grand. And when I went back in to ask, that's funny, we just got done with this long conversation, why didn't you say anything about that light? And he says, I don't want it fixed. So why don't you want it fixed? He said, because they're just getting ready to put up a very expensive, beautiful neon sign in front, and he believes that the intensity of that XL light will wash out his sign, that it'll make it not as dramatic, not as visible. And he was showing me across, where the trading post thing is. So I don't know if we can kind of address that as we're, because I was surprised he didn't say anything about it, and then he goes, yeah, I didn't on purpose because I don't want it to work, because he thinks that that's going to wash it out. So I kind of, if we can kind of address some of that and see what they're doing. And the electrical obviously was always intended to go ahead and support the holiday lighting and additional tree lighting to try and bring that kind of liveliness down there that other communities seem to have. So what we're doing will support that, correct?
Oh, yes, it will.
All right, thanks. I don't know if you can work with Excel on how they point the light or what kind of, whether they can put a different type of light in there if there's some kind of concerns. I know the neighborhoods, we went through that whole round as they were coming in, but if you'll just find out about that, I'd appreciate it.
I will. To let you know, we anticipate eventually Excel will be turning all those lights into LED heads, but right now I don't think the right fixture head is available, so that'll be down the line. How it will affect the neon sign, I'm not sure yet, but we'll look into that. Okay.
Councilmember Russell.
Actually, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work out with the planning, and I mean, once we get everything together, I do think we need to go back down there. My concern was there were not nearly as many business owners there today as there were there several months ago, and the ones that are there feel like the city does not listen to them. And all of this planning and all of this $533,000 that we're spending there, they're not really happy about it. The one thing they're concerned about is their parking, and it's huge. They said, I don't care how many plants you put in the median, I don't care what you do, I don't want any more parking taken away. So we could be really excited about all these things we're doing, but if we continue dissing the business owners, I think we're going to be in deep trouble. That's what I think. I mean, there was actually even some threats about the city is dependent on sales tax revenue, but they're not treating the businesses like that is important to us. We don't listen to them. City council doesn't. And actually, I think city council got blamed for some things when I don't think it's totally city council either. But I'm thinking that we could dump money in there and still have them really upset.
I think this is a great segue into the second portion of our program here, because I think that parking issue is mostly related to this mid-block crossing issue. Just to wrap up the issue on the Excel lighting, I think that we just need to be conscious when they switch to those LED poles about the directionality and functionality of those lights. So just, as they put those in, just be aware, I think. You want to move on with the mid-block?
Yeah, on to the mid-block. Of course, the construction of the temporary crossing, it really did provide us the opportunity to see how it functioned. We got plenty of comments from those that use it. We had the Inglewood Transportation Advisory Commission go out there and do a field trip, and they offered some suggestions that should have been in your packet this last week. Along with staff, we've been out there and watched how it functions. And based on those observations, we do have some suggestions to make it safer. And I want to say make it safer. We can't make it safe. I mean, there's still, always the opportunity where you don't have a signalized intersection that somebody will not pay attention. But we can make it safer. We have some ideas. So I brought these gentlemen along tonight. Paul Weller handles the design. And, of course, Ladd's our traffic engineer, answer any traffic questions, and Larry will be handling the construction of this. So I think I'd like maybe Paul to start with just an overview of just some of the changes that you'll see, or that we're recommending you'll see, from the temporary one to the permanent.
Good evening. One of the recommendations that was made by the ETAC committee was to add a raised island on the north side of the mid-block, making people feel more protected rather than standing kind of out on the island where a car could have the potential to hit them. So we're looking at adding that, and then at the same time we're looking at adding that same kind of raised median over on the side on the bump out. That will serve two purposes. It will serve to call attention to the mid-block, direct people to the actual crossing rather than shortcutting across and not using it. And it'll also take care of a little bit of a drainage problem that we've got over there. And we can upgrade it a little bit and make it look have a better presence in terms of how it would affect the streetscape. So those are the main design changes that we're making based on what ETAC has recommended. And then the other design change, to make it safer, we are extending the bulb out, or we have considered extending the bulb out to a distance of 35 feet from the crosswalk to provide an additional sight distance. One of the things we've noticed is that one car in one lane might stop for a pedestrian, but the other car doesn't see the pedestrian, so they have no time to react and stop. So the traffic analysis would have us move that back. So that is also included in our preliminary design. That does have the negative effect of taking 1 to 2 parking spots on each side of the street.
Thanks, Paul. I'll add to that one of the other major construction challenges we have that you won't see in the end, but we have to add 4 inlets, and that's at each end of the bulb outs. Right now we just put a pipe through the flow line for the temporary one, so that's another change you'll see. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if Paul mentioned that the flashing lights was a big issue, and we've got those right now included as part of the permanent plan.
Thank you.
So I think at this point we might just open it up to questions. And
thank you. I think it was Councilmember Olson.
So I wanted to pick up on this morning. Not all of us were there. I think the major issue for them was the loss of parking, right?
Yes, it was.
And to me, this was more of a stepping back from the whole thing. And I know that I asked this a couple of times when we were starting down this road of at what point will we involve the citizens. And I think you all have done really good work in researching and getting ETAC involved. But to them, it feels like they were left out of the process. So I know that what you were doing was bringing an idea to them today, but to them I think it mostly sounded like this is what you're going to do. And hearing that the federal government's rules require the 30 feet when you put in the signalized or the flashing lights, then it's like, well, leading with that might have been helpful for them to know that it wasn't you deciding this. It's a larger.
Yeah, we kind of live and die by that manual.
Yeah.
Doing
so I think
if
everyone had known that to begin with, it would have helped so much. And if there's a way to backtrack on this whole project and involve some key players down there, that we maybe you just start from scratch again and say, okay, this is what the rules are. This is what we have to abide by federally. And if we don't, then council takes it. I heard this morning that we take it upon ourselves, right? If we decide to go against that, we're taking the liability for the city.
I don't know if it's really liability, but Ladd, you want to offer?
Well, I thought that's what was said this morning. Maybe I misunderstood. Sorry.
No, I can answer. Yes, we, as your professional staff, we're going to recommend, we're going to go by the safety guidelines. It doesn't mean you can't discuss it with us and decide something different, but we want to propose what's considered safe by the standards. And what we had before was fine. But when you add the flashing lights, the standards change to 30 feet minimum from the crosswalk.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think they ever knew that at the beginning, and so somehow we are not good at telling them some fine details that, like, oh, that isn't something you just came up with on your own to be rude and take parking away. So somehow, and I talked with Eric this morning about this, if there's some process, there's a little glitch in the way we're going at these projects sometimes when it involves some of our businesses. And that particular part of our business community is the most upset about things, has been for a long time. So I would love to see us go back and try and reconfigure who can be in a group beyond ETAC, who really own the businesses, are trying to make ends meet down there. And then I also would really appreciate some kind of a crowdsourcing parking survey. And I don't want to spend any money on a survey, but I do think it would be helpful to see what the extent is of parking at different times of the day. And I think crowdsourcing would be the easiest way to do it. But I don't know if your GIS folks can help set up something like that.
I'm not sure, but we'll look into it.
Yeah. I mean, what you'd do is you'd give a code out to everybody probably in the area, and they just keep taking pictures and sending stuff in, and you'd get this mass data. And you can probably do it over the course of a week or 2 weeks, get all kinds of information on where are the worst of the parking issues that they are talking about, because Some of us go by there at different hours and we don't see any parking problems, but I'm certainly not there at all the hours that they are. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Protem?
Could you help clarify what you mean by flashing bulb signs? Because I've seen multiple different kinds. And when you say 30 feet, could you explain where 30 feet is from where?
From the edge of the crosswalk, and in the case of southbound traffic, to the north, and then on the opposite side of the street is the oncoming traffic, 30 feet from the edge of the crosswalk.
Before the crosswalk?
Yes, before the crosswalk. No parking within that area. And that is what the business owners were most upset about this morning, yes, is losing another spot or two.
Up to 4, possibly.
On each side, yes.
It's funny how we learn these things at the end, you know, just... secondly, have we decided what type of signs we're looking at? Or
Rapid flashers like you see out here on Inca, solar powered. There'd be one on each side, and then a push button in the middle also to activate it for anybody that might be stuck in the landing area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Yates?
Before we actually install the bump outs and stuff, is there a possibility that we could do the rapid flashers and assess how that works, if it is sufficient, or, you know, and then see if we need to add those bump outs later? Because I know that these are federal standards, these are codes, but I also know that cities frequently don't follow every single code.
No, that's absolutely true. It might be possible to do that, but I don't recommend it. Again, we still have the design standard of the no parking area, and we're going to be tearing it up to put in the foundations for those. I mean, we would prefer to build it all with a permanent.
Well, the lights, do they have to have all the other work done before the lights go in? You know, could we put up the lights and maybe observe it for a couple of weeks and before we start the construction, or make the final decision on the construction for the build outs?
What do you think?
As we were discussing this morning, or what you were asking, once you put a traffic control, which is the light at either beacons or traffic signal, that distance from the crosswalk is at 30 feet. You cannot park, or not just even from crosswalk, from the flashing light, from the traffic signal at 30 feet. Before it was 20 because of from the crosswalk is at 20 feet, but if it's become a signalized, and now it's becoming 30 feet is from traffic model code for Colorado municipalities. So this is what we are discussing this morning. It's just we are kind of obliged to do that unless we are told not to.
To answer your question, though, it could be done. I mean, we could put the lights out there without doing anything else, I suppose. Like I say, it would take, another mobilization of construction. It might delay our final design, because until we decide that, we can't put out the bid package. But, for that reason this morning, I didn't recommend doing that, but it is possible.
But we would have to, or don't have to. It's just kind of the issue is just restrict the parking to 30 feet and move those shark teeth, those yield things on the road to 30 feet as well from 20.
Councilmember Yates, anything else to add?
No.
Thank you. Councilmember Valentine?
I knew I couldn't attend the meeting today, but I've gone down there quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and there was a lot of concern about, the signalized issue. I think Councilmember Gillett kind of alluded to it. They're frustrated because we didn't know either. This wasn't things that we were told as we were doing the original mid-block crossing on these options when we were talking about lights. So I see their frustration because when Chief Collins and City Manager Keck went down there and they start talking about this signalized light, there was a mass amount of miscommunication apparently from what you intended on the information that was that you provided today. So obviously they don't want to lose any more parking. And if you have to move it out 30 feet from the, and granted this is just the safety suggestions, and I understand it's not necessary to do that. Obviously it's not, we didn't do it now. So if it was truly a safety concern issue, that's not what's happening now, and people don't feel safe. And they want those flashing lights because they want some attention brought to it. If you have to move the crosswalk piece of it from the parking side, you need to move it on the median side too, don't you? I mean, because you cannot see somebody when they're in that median, and I disagree as many times as I've used that crosswalk since it's been put in. To do a raised median, I think, would be actually the opposite of any kind of safety. And if you have to have 30 feet of visibility going out, you should have 30 feet of visibility on those medians too, because people can't see once you get those 2 lanes to stop. Once you're in there, they can't see what's going on, and there's for that either. So unless you have the flashing lights, and if the flashing lights means 30 feet of visibility, then you would have to do it for the medians as well, wouldn't you?
Well, I believe we have the visibility in the medians because what we're proposing is just the real low planters. I think they're 12 inches high. So, but it is hard to see people just because of all the other things going on in the block.
Mm-hmm.
But we cut down the trees already that we're going to restrict sight distance in the median. So I think we have that. And I don't believe that what we're proposing, the little 12-inch protection, would affect the sight distance.
Yeah, I don't think you do. They're not stopping, I think, just because there's this continuous line there. So if you're going to go ahead, I really would like to see where you're coming, where these safety suggestions are, so that we know what the options are in there, what they're trying to accomplish with that, so that we can make a decision if we have an option to go with that, what we would be giving up or what we would be gaining in doing that piece of it.
Sure.
And they were under the impression prior to today that there was going to be a light, like a red, yellow, green light put up, a signal light there. Also, they're still, and I am confused as well, why we cannot take the speed limit down to 25.
Well, we support taking it down to 25 in the downtown area. LAD had a traffic study done, and the results came back, and we believe that's appropriate just for the downtown area.
Right.
That's where it can meet the. Here you go, LAD.
I'd like to get a little bit more information. Then I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but something that would be maybe more clear and more consistent in the communication of what's going on, because what I was hearing for the last 2 weeks apparently wasn't what you said today, and some of the reasoning given for it wasn't what they had been communicated with before. So we need to kind of get all of these suggestions put together so that we know what we're doing before we make a decision, and what's a suggestion, what's best practices, and what we gain and what we lose if we make a decision not to do the 30 feet. Are there other things that we could do that would enhance that that would kind of mitigate not doing the 30 feet? And I'd like to see that information so I can be informed. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Russell, I will warn us, we are running a little bit over schedule here. I'm going to try to wrap this up here in the next few minutes. So.
Okay, what Councilmember Yates proposed is really one of the things that the businesses down there asked for, is that we would just try the traffic light, and if it works, fine, then we can move forward from there. But if it doesn't work, then why spend all of this money on the bulb out if they would end up not wanting it altogether? I think the two things that we maybe should consider doing is going ahead and putting in the flashing lights, but also lowering the speed limit at the same time. However, I believe one of the problems that they are very concerned about, if we lower the speed limit, it needs to be enforced. And I think that becomes problematic. Apparently, when Littleton lowered their speed limit, they had police officers standing down at the end of the road pulling people over. They were just standing there. And within a couple of weeks, they had everybody trained. The speed limit is 25 miles an hour. So I think maybe that's one thing we could consider doing.
Thank you. In an effort to try to wrap this conversation up, and I'll come to you in just a moment. Do you want to add something real quickly? Go ahead, please.
So what would we count as criteria to decide that the flashing lights worked without the 30 feet?
Well,
I'm worried it would be just that nobody got hit by a
we
car.
could put barricades out there to, temporarily do the 30 feet if you wanted.
I mean,
we could do that.
How do we? I agree with you. I think the three things, and then add paint to it.
Right,
Paint, flashing light, and speed, lowering the speed. But I'm wondering, how will we know if the actual flashing light thing worked?
I think the 30 feet we could put in after the fact if we know. You're going to know because the businesses will be happy.
I'm going to try to wrap this conversation up. We've, a bit over our time here. I'm going to suggest that, we're not going to come to a solution on the issues of speed limit, sight distancing, and whether or not to have this light or what form of a light tonight. Perhaps we could get some information on the cost of that as well. Might be helpful in a follow-up conversation, which I'm envisioning, both for the Broadway project as well as the mid-block crossing, which is, I think, what's going to be required here. Real quickly before we get off this topic, and Councilmember Yates, I'll give you an opportunity to add something if you'd like here at the end. Are we going to move forward without any council involvement to redo the electrical systems there, and will that involve any tear up of the right of way?
Oh, it will. Most of it will be boring, but there'll still be pits, and we'll still have to remove and replace the foundations for all the pedestrian lights.
Are we running a new conduit, or are we just running stuff into
all new?
All new conduit. Yep. Have we considered running a sister conduit along with that for additional capacity? As we're sort of tearing up the right of way? Absolutely. Excellent. Are there going to be any business interruptions associated in your mind?
Mainly parking.
Oh, that little issue.
We do
okay,
construction,
great.
parking.
How many spots will be affected when?
And how long?
And how long? Thank you, sir.
Well, let me tell you, if we were going to do the mid-block crossing, that's 45 to 60 days of complete closure. As far as for the electrical, I think I don't know. I mean, quite not. Larry, do you have an idea? No, we don't have plans. Okay, not sure.
Okay, fair enough. I think, we need to communicate that very effectively before we move forward with this project. So I think I've got to agree with Councilmember Olson. Maybe we need to pump our brakes just a little bit here. I know that we're anxious to get this sort of built out this year, but we need to make sure we're communicating effectively, make sure we've got a game plan that we all sort of agree upon on the mid-block as well as the improvements on the 3400
We have some time here. We'll be doing the planning and the engineering.
Yep, fair enough. And
Back
so
to
what
you
I'd like
later.
to see, I think, and hopefully council can agree, is we'd like to see some recommendations come forward based upon some information and alternatives perhaps to that recommendation, both on the improvements as well as the mid-block. Anything to add before we move on to our last topic
I
here?
just would really like to have some business ownership involved in that from here on in. If we can get 4 or 5 from down there, men and women, I think there was a tendency to be a little bit lopsided, but
I like that idea. I've got some relationships there. I can try to help, get some folks to the right places if we feel like we can find a few representatives who can help us make that recommendation with staff.
yeah. I think that will help in the long run for us.
I agree.
Councilmember Yates.
The question of how do we know if something works or not, it's going to have to be observation. It's going to require some people to sit down and kind of watch this thing for a little while. Because, I've gone across there this weekend when I went across there. I saw people coming close to running into each other because a person would stop to allow me to go across, but the person behind wasn't paying any attention. The flashing lights would help notify those folks, and it'd be interesting to see if we still have those same types of things happening where people are jockeying to change lanes or not knowing what's going on. And I do agree that we need to move the speed limit down to 25. And I don't know if the rest of council's aware of this, but if staff does it, we do have some issues with tickets, making tickets stick. If council votes to lower the speed limit, then tickets can actually stick in the court. So that's another thing that we have to think about.
Thank you. Councilmember Valentine, last comment.
I would like to make a suggestion that we take the last issue on the study session and we can take care of it at the end of our council meeting. We do not have enough time.
That's fine. Any final comments on this issue? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn and pick this meeting back up in the other room.